Ruin My Childhood.
Thank you for listening to Ruin My Childhood. We're back.
After all these years.
Yeah, it's been about a year and a quarter.
Oh, damn. That long.
Next month would have been our 5-year anniversary of the podcast, but, you know, we'll have to do a Barry Bonds asterisk since we took a year off.
Oh, come on. No one needed us during the pandemic.
That's when they needed us the most.
I can assure you they did not.
For those of you who don't remember us, I'm Mike.
And I'm Kat.
We're married and we do a podcast together where we go back and look at things from our childhood and see if they still hold up as adults. And for those of you guys who do remember us, thanks for coming back. We're sorry we abandoned you for a year and a half.
I'm not sorry. I have no regrets.
You know, existential dread and terror and whatnot.
I was busy.
Yeah.
I've never worked more in my entire life than I have during the pandemic.
Yeah, I was busier even when working from home. And now I've got my new job where I'm traveling a lot. So it's been a really different kind of life for us lately.
I think I'm up to 42 different productions I've worked on just during the pandemic.
Brag. And
some of those productions I worked, several weeks on.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like I was just working one day a month.
You know, we were incredibly lucky and blessed during the pandemic that we were both able to work. So we acknowledge that we're very, very fortunate. We even upgraded our podcast equipment during the pandemic, and then we ended up not really using it. But you know what?
I had to take 7 months off of work while the studios were shut down, and I was still insanely busy.
Yeah.
Crazy times.
That's not what we're here to talk about.
Sure it is.
So, The Batman just came out last Friday, just a few days ago as of recording. One of my most anticipated movies of the last 5 years or so. And we thought, what a fitting way to come back to the podcast with a Batman movie. We previously had done Batman Forever and Batman Returns. So we're going to take it all the way back to 1989 to Tim Burton's original Batman.
I mean, to be fair, this wasn't really from our childhood. It's from our babyhood.
I mean, this was a huge part of my childhood. I vividly remember watching this before my brother was born. And he was born when I was 2.5. So I was watching this movie when I was way too young for it. I had this on VHS and DVD, and now I've got it on Blu-ray, but I've probably watched this movie easily 50 times in my lifetime.
Yikes. Where were your parents?
This was my babysitter. Like, no joke. I even remember the VHS that it had like a Bugs Bunny tie-in little teaser before the movie started, and there was also like a Pepsi or a Coke.
The VHS box had a teaser?
Like the VHS itself, like the little trailers before the movie. It had like a little Warner Brothers Bugs Bunny tie-in. And there was even like a commercial with Michael Goff, who played Alfred, going through like a drive-through getting a can of Coke for Bruce Wayne and Batman. So
dang,
I definitely remember this. What do you remember about this movie?
I think what I remember of this is actually just from commercials or trailers or something. Because on closer inspection, I'm pretty sure I've only seen the Batman films that came after this one.
Okay, so you saw Batman Returns with Catwoman and Penguin?
Yeah.
Okay. So interesting. I had no idea that you didn't remember this movie or hadn't seen it.
I wasn't allowed to watch anything that young.
Oh, that's crazy. Yeah, this was my babysitter before kindergarten.
I
this
had like
particular movie.
A wall of pious evangelicals keeping me from the good stuff.
So yeah, this time, normally at this point, we would read some comments from our listeners.
It's the Hellfire Wall.
Normally we would read some comments from our listeners from social media or play some voicemails, but we just kind of came back, so we're not going to do that this time around. We're going to
spraying it on you.
We're going to do it on the next episode. We're going to try a few things that are going to be a little bit different going forward, so the episodes might change over the next 2 or 3 episodes.
We're rebranding, folks.
Yep. So yeah, changing the format. But yeah, let's go watch the movie, and we'll report back to you guys.
Should be interesting.
All right, we're back. What we're going to do, we want to educate you guys about the movies that we're watching and the TV shows, and get you guys to kind of know what goes into making a movie and the history of the movies and TV shows and productions and whatnot.
1989, Batman, directed by Tim Burton, written by Sam Hamm and Warren Scarron. also known as the writer of Top Gun, Beverly Hills Cop 2, and Beetlejuice, who died less than a year after Batman was released. It was released June 23rd, 89, with a budget of $35 million and did $411 million at the box office. That had to be some kind of a record at the time.
This was one of the most profitable movies of all time, which is why the sequel is greenlit immediately.
Insane. On Rotten Tomatoes, it has a critic approval of 72%, audience approval of 84%. Although I wonder how many years later it took until we got Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, so I mean, it still aggregates from previous publications and whatnot, but it's weird. Like Citizen Kane just went from a perfect score to 99 just like 6 months ago because of a new review. So
dang.
Yeah.
So this was the first appearance of Michael Keaton as Batman / Bruce Wayne. We got Jack Nicholson as the Joker / Jack Napier. Michael Goff is it Goff or Go?
I always pronounce it as Goff.
Go. Van Gogh? Or like Goff Street in San Francisco.
I think it's like Goff Street in San Francisco.
Michael, who played Alfred. Kim Basinger as Vicky Vale. Billy D. Williams as Harvey Dent. And Robert Wool as Knox.
Yeah.
So this is in various stages of development since the late 70s that would have continued the CBS show, but producers Benjamin Melniker and Michael E. Uslan purchased the film rights of Batman from DC in 1979. It was Uslan's wish to, quote, make the definitive, dark, serious version of Batman the way Bob Kane and Bill Finger had envisioned him in 1939. Nobody wanted the project until Uslan wrote the treatment and WB agreed to produce in 1980. So that's very interesting to me that it seems like the cinematic version of Batman has always been angling for that darker, edgier side. And we keep being told with each iteration, oh, you know, this is the definitive, dark, gritty Batman. And you know, they keep getting better.
They do.
To be fair.
And to be fair, at this time in comic book history, this was when comics were starting to get dark again because the Hays Code and whatnot, and the comic, I can't remember the actual comics version of the Hays Code, what it's called. But there used to be like a stamp that you'd have to get
interesting.
on. Yeah, there was like a Hays Code for comic books. So they got really campy. So believe it or not, like the Adam West Batman TV show, it was actually probably the most accurate Batman thing because it was exactly like the campy comics at the time. But right around this period, we started getting really dark comics and graphic novels that were like adjacent, that weren't technically part of the continuity. So we had The Killing Joke, which is one of the most definitive Joker stories. And then you also had The Dark Knight Returns, which is set in like an alternate future where Batman comes back as a grizzled old man to try to clean up Gotham again.
So was that the beginning of the DC universe?
Well, I mean, DC's been around since like the 1930s, but this was, kind of the start of the DC cinematic universe. Like eventually when we get into the Schumacher versions with where Val Kilmer and George Clooney play Batman, those are actually technically sequels to this movie. They name dropped Superman, but we never actually got any crossovers until 2016.
That's so interesting that you mentioned the comic version of the Hays Code, which would be, the Comics Code Authority seal.
Correct.
That is so interesting. Like, we talk about this a lot now that we know more about it. I've learned way too much about the film industry via our actors union, SAG-AFTRA, and it educated me quite a bit on the Hays Code, and I really had no concept of just how censored everything was back in the day, because, you know, we went from the inception of the Hays Code to everything that had been common being somehow too bawdy, too far over the line. And we have this idea that people back then, when the Hays Code was in effect, were somehow more chaste and angelic than people these days. But really, it was just...
everybody was horny all the time.
Censorship.
What did you say the name of the comic code was?
It is... hang on. The Comics Code Authority.
Yeah, that's right. You know what comic book was the first one to not use it when they had a pushy subject? It was actually a Spider-Man comic book where they were dealing with drug use, and Stan Lee was like, yeah, let's just put it out there because it got blocked and they weren't going to get it approved. And it didn't hurt comic book sales at all. So at that point, Marvel and DC started to play a little fast and loose and start getting darker.
And interestingly enough, in January 2011, Archie Comics announced they would no longer feature the Comics Code Authority seal on their covers, which in the comic book world, it doesn't really get much more vanilla than Archie Comics. I think they were actually owned by a different company that made them into Christian comics for a while. So that's really interesting that
That's
it would
crazy.
just be done for them.
Yeah. Wow. Let's get back into protection. This is quite a tangent, but it was interesting. So yeah, you mentioned that Warner Brothers agreed to produce this in 1980. Came out a full 9 years later in 1989. And the reason was they actually announced that they were going to have it released in 1985 before they had scripts or anything like that. But eventually they got this kind of story, this treatment that was still mainly based off a comic, Batman Strange Apparitions. And it was supposed to come out in 1985 with a budget of $20 million. They wanted to have William Golden as James Gordon, David Niven as Alfred,
William
Peter O'Toole.
Holden?
Mm-hmm.
You said Golden.
Oh, did I say it? Oh, yeah. William Holden. And then Peter O'Toole as Penguin. Of course, Holden and Niven passed away, so that wasn't going to work.
Also a founding member of SAG.
Yeah. So that obviously wasn't going to happen. So then it went through various stages, and there was a point where Ivan Reitman was going to direct it, and Bill Murray was going to be Batman / Bruce Wayne.
Oh, yikes.
That ended up not happening because Pee Wee Herman came out, and Pee Wee's Big Adventure just blew up the box office. Tim Burton was all of a sudden like the director that everybody wanted.
He did Beetlejuice after that.
So he actually did, he did do Beetlejuice after that, and it was after he did Beetlejuice where they did agree to like sign on for more money. So that's where it got to the $35 million budget.
I love that
20.
something as bizarre as Beetlejuice was like, yeah, we trust this guy now.
Yeah, I mean, it was a hit, and there was special effects and whatnot. So he got that project, and then they slowly redid the script. So he and his girlfriend at the time, Tim Burton, wrote a 30-page treatment that basically took everything out from the previous version, and then he got some comic book writers and some screenwriters, his screenwriter that wrote Beetlejuice with him, to kind of punch it up. And originally this was going to be way more packed. It was going to have Eddie Murphy as Robin, and then it was going to be Marlon Wayans as Robin, and then eventually they cut those out, and we got the version that we have today. It went into pre-production in April of 1988, and then they decided to make it. They were really trying to go with an obvious action star.
Like Harrison Ford, Dennis Quaid, Charlie Sheen, Mel Gibson were all considered. Willem Dafoe would have been an interesting one.
That's who he really wanted, and it's been rumored for like the last 30 years that he was supposed to be Joker, but Tim Burton said like 20 years later that no, he really wanted Willem Dafoe as Batman. And it didn't work out for scheduling reasons.
Yeah, his penis is too alarmingly large.
You can't make a rubber
fit in the suit.
Now the Joker is where there's a lot of controversy because Jack Nicholson killed it. Of course, he got the role, and up until it's debatable whether it was 2003 with Keanu Reeves or 2012 with Will Smith, who became the highest paid actor for a single role. But it's estimated that Jack Nicholson made $60 to $90 million on this because what he did is he dropped his fee from $10 million per picture to $6 million for back-end deals. The only reason he took the role is, of course, they talked to people like Tim Curry, David Bowie, John Lithgow, and a bunch of other, kind of weird actors, James Wood, Brad Dourif, who did Chucky.
Brad Dourif would have been freaking amazing.
He would have been great.
Brad Dourif is like the single greatest actor to ever be on the X-Files.
He's creepy.
He's amazing.
But what they did is they totally screwed Robin Williams over because they really wanted Jack Nicholson, and Jack Nicholson was playing like hardball. He wanted nights off anytime the Lakers were playing. He wanted certain days where you can go golfing. He had certain times where he wasn't allowed to work until he was done golfing. And
it sounds like he was just trolling because he didn't actually want it.
Well, and he was also like the biggest actor at the time. So what they did is they offered the role to Robin Williams. Robin Williams wanted it. Warner Brothers then went to Jack Nicholson and said, hey, ding dong, this is going to be one of the biggest movies of all time. Robin Williams is going to take it, and Jack Nicholson decided to take the role. So Robin Williams was pissed and did a lot of interviews, and then they finally convinced him to do the Riddler in Batman Forever, and then they took it away from him and gave that to Jim Carrey. So
that is so
Warner
mean.
Brothers screwed him over
I
twice.
read that John Lithgow was seriously considered for the Joker as well. Let's see, there's actually a quote here. Lithgow, during his audition, attempted to talk Burton out of casting him, a decision he would later publicly regret, stating, I didn't realize it was such a big deal.
Again, it was a big deal. Like, to this day, when you talk about the cultural impact of this movie, there are still a lot of people who think Michael Keaton is the best on-screen version of Batman. Even with Christian Bale, people were still like, nah, Michael Keaton's better.
Really?
Yeah, because this was like the first big action superhero movie that took kind of superheroes seriously and made them dark and actually made them action movies, because there hadn't been a major superhero movie in almost 10 years, because the Superman movies got weirder and weirder and got worse and worse and worse. Because they just got really bad. So this one being not a bad movie and kind of cool and edgy, made it blow off. And they also spent like $750 million, or there was $750 million worth of merchandise sold before this even came out.
Damn.
So this movie could have flopped and they still would have made money on it, because they did the biggest...
Kids will always buy the toys.
Well, they did the biggest marketing push for a movie of all time. This was where like the big promos that we see now and billboards and buses and... McDonald's tie-ins. They had McDonald's mugs and stuff like that, posters, watches. There was a point where people were like cutting it into their heads, shaving, getting tattoos for movies they hadn't even seen.
So there you have it, folks. End stage capitalism was spurred by 1989's Batman.
Yeah. So the New Yorker actually said this was a high concept movie that was less of a movie and more of a corporate behemoth.
Dang. A what?
I said behemoth.
Behemoth.
Behemoth. But yeah, this was a huge deal.
I actually found a quote from Kevin Smith, filmmaker and comic book writer. He said, quote, "That summer was huge. You couldn't turn around without seeing the bat signal somewhere. People were cutting it into their heads. It was just the summer of Batman, and if you're a comic book fan, it was pretty hot."
Yeah.
That's great.
I mean, and I think this was one of the first movies where they did like a novelization tie-in too.
Oh.
I actually had it. I used to have the novelization of this that I got like used when I was in like middle school.
Legit.
But I guess I should summarize this movie briefly. I'm going to keep it real quick. Most people have seen this movie. But...
I'm glad you can summarize it, because there are no wide shots in the entire film, so I couldn't summarize it if my life depended on it.
Oh, it's all good. I've seen this so many times. Like I could have recorded this podcast without actually watching it.
I still don't really know what happened.
It's cool. We'll talk it through. So essentially, this is about a month into Batman's career of being Batman. And meanwhile, Jack Napier, who's like this gangster played by Jack Nicholson, is being set up by his boss to be the fall guy as Billy D. Williams, who plays District Attorney Harvey Dent, who eventually becomes Two-Face, but turns into Tommy Lee Jones first and then becomes Two-Face. He is cracking down on crime.
Wait, that's the same... It's not a reboot at that point?
It's a soft reboot, so it's the same continuity. And it's because that's a lot of the actors, the actor who plays Commissioner Gordon, Alfred, they actually go through all 4 movies. So it's a soft reboot. And actually, when you watch, I don't remember if it's Batman and Robin or Batman Forever, but you actually see like Joker paraphernalia.
See, I think that's where DC really shit the bed in terms of building their comic book universe, because they did all these soft reboots instead of just like finding the right cast to begin with and like really leaning into it.
Well, there's a lot of reasons that went into it.
Fans feel insecure, Michael.
So I would like to continue this particular conversation when we do Batman Returns.
Okay.
I kind of want to do Batman Returns later in the year when the Flash movie comes out, although they just announced today that it's being delayed till 2023.
Oh, no.
Because Michael Keaton's coming back as Batman in the Flash movie, because it's like a multiverse movie.
Oh, that's right. Everything's becoming multiverse
Exactly.
now.
So we'll continue this conversation, because it eventually will lead into Batman Forever, which we've already covered. So I think that'll be a better, more appropriate time to discuss all the soft reboots. So anyway, yeah, the district attorney, Harvey Dent, is cracking down on crime. The main crime lord, Grisham, is trying to set up Jack Napier as the fall guy. Batman goes because there's this huge gunfight between the police and Napier. He intervenes, but accidentally drops the Joker. He becomes the Joker. Jack Napier into the vat of chemicals, turns him into the Joker, and the Joker decides he's going to poison cosmetics and hair products and make people die with his like Joker Laugh-X gas. And the crux of the movie is we're at the bicentennial of the city, and they're going to have this giant parade, and he hijacks the parade, and he's gonna basically do a giant gas bomb and wipe out the city. And Batman's got to save the day, man.
This is a confusing movie.
It's weird. It's all over the place. There's a lot of over the top.
And it seems like not everyone is really creatively on the same page in terms of performance. Because, like, I don't want to call her boring. Let's say that Kim Basinger was really naturalistic.
No, she was boring.
And then some people were really cartoony, and some aspects they were trying to lean into realism, and then other aspects you're like, what? That doesn't make any sense. And every time I would look down at my phone to write down a note, I'd look up and I would have just completely lost what was going on. So as I saw it, there were random people who started taking on these traits of the Joker, and I had completely missed how that happened to begin with.
That's fair, because when that is explained, it's on a newscast, and
Right.
one of the anchors starts experiencing it. And then there's like a little commercial at one point where Joker kind of says what's going on.
But you don't see the same sets of symptoms with each person.
No.
So like the newscaster, she's talking about 2 models who died, and they've got the Joker's weird mouth in the photos. So it would imply that it's been a little bit of time that there are photos in existence of these models, like already beginning their shape shift.
Well, no, it's because what happens is they go crazy, and for just a few seconds or minutes before they die, and it makes their face freeze in a smile, and then they die.
So the newscaster was showing post-mortem photos of both of the models.
That's correct.
Got it. Okay.
Yes.
Thanks for clearing that up.
No problem. That's what I'm here for, as the resident pop culture expert.
And like the Joker appears and all this weird stuff is happening, and people are kind of just like accepting it.
Yeah, and it is weird because Batman is an urban legend at this point. So there's a reporter named Knox he's one of those people who's also very cartoony and doesn't really fit in with the rest of the cast.
Wait. Batman's an urban legend.
At this point.
But he's only 3 months into being Batman.
He's only a month in.
He's only a month in.
Yeah.
Okay, but his Batcave was like tricked the F out.
Well, he is a billionaire.
That would have taken years to assemble. So was he like building up to be the Batman for a while?
Yeah. So every version of Batman has some build up time and lead up time. And he also kind of does like a soft launch.
Yeah, but I feel like Alfred is so sensible. How did he let this happen?
He's an employee. He's an employee father. No, there's always this kind of a setup period, and there's kind of a soft launch because the opening of the movie it looks like it's going to be the origin of Batman, because you see a little kid and his parents going into an alley, and then they get mugged, and it's like, oh, that's the origin story. They made a point of saying they didn't want to do an origin story. They wanted to have his origin in flashbacks that tie into elements of the story, because spoiler alert, what they end up having happen was the Joker as a young man killed Bruce Wayne's parents in the alley. I don't necessarily like that they connect it, but this kind of...
Is that not usually his origin story?
So the Joker doesn't have a definitive origin story in the comic books. And that's one of the things that makes him interesting is he's just a crazy person. We don't know why. He's just pure evil and pure crazy. Now, the Killing Joke, which... the origin in this movie is based off the Killing Joke. He is a failed comedian that gets tricked into doing crime with these like gangsters, and then Batman shows up, punches him, and knocks him into a vat of chemicals, and becomes the Joker. But that is a non-continuity story. In fact, 20, 30 years later after this movie, they ended up having it where there's actually 3 Jokers, and Batman didn't even realize there's 3 different Jokers. So the Joker's whole thing is he's just this crazy person who's a force of nature, and nobody knows why he is the way that he is.
From a writing standpoint, that is deeply problematic. So does Bruce Wayne, do his parents always die the same way?
Yeah,
and this was the first time it changed?
The only thing that changed was that it's Joe Chill is who kills him in the...
Joe Chill.
But in this version, they did change it to make the tie-in to the Joker. And this is another one of the things where it really affects pop culture, because if you look at most superhero movies, there's always a tie to the main character. It goes to the sequels. He ends up dating Catwoman, but not knowing it's Catwoman until the end of the movie.
Stupid.
Riddler in Batman Forever works for Batman and is jealous of Bruce Wayne. And it just goes on and on and on. Spider-Man was the same way. Every Spider-Man villain knows who Spider-Man is and is directly related
Some
to
random
them.
teen from Queens.
Exactly.
Got it.
This really kind of started that trend. And even the Joker dies at the end, and it kind of was that's still a trend today. It's very rare that a villain survives the end of a superhero movie.
That's so lame, because in real life, like, we still have Jeff Bezos.
Yeah. And Ken Griffin at Citadel.
Yeah, Ken Griffin.
You bastard.
We're on to you.
So yeah, I mean, that's basically the summary of the movie. Were there any highlights that you especially liked? I know you don't really remember this movie, or maybe might have not even seen the movie, but anything that really stood out to you that was cool or exciting or weird or bad?
Oh my gosh, there's so much that was just bizarre and bad. I said earlier that there are like no wide shots in this whole film, and that's what made it so hard to follow for me. Almost everything is like a really short take. So much of the action feels like insert shots, and usually an insert shot is like, I mean, it's basically usually a close-up. It's to establish an object in the scene so you know it's there. It's like, heads up, this is here. But it's like every single shot is, this is over here, and this is over here, and this is over here, and you really need to know that all of those things happen. So it's like if you blink, you miss something.
Yeah.
And that's so overwhelming. And then on top of it, there are aspects of the performances that are really more like theatrical, like a stage show in terms of the blocking. Like the Joker walks up to this dude on the steps out front of City Hall and he stabs him in the throat with a quill, and then everyone starts shooting, but everyone stays clumped together in a group on the stairs. You get to the end of the scene and all this stuff has gone down and all the same people are still there. Like, what?
Well, and part of that is because this movie was done practically. This was really before CG. So most of it is matte paintings and practical sets in front of it. So you have to have a very obviously angle and scope so it looks 3D and looks good for the screen.
And that gives you so much more leeway in terms of how much you can show in a film. So you can tell that they really like tried to squeeze a ton of locations into this. Not locations, because it was all on a stage, but there's so many different sets. And I feel like, you know, maybe that utilization of those cheaper methods, which worked phenomenally well, kind of led them down this hole of maybe trying to do too much, show too much, and in that sense it becomes really fast-paced and hard to mentally keep up.
I think you're right, because, you know, reading the background of this, of how many characters they were going to have, originally this was going to have Penguin and Robin and potentially introduce Two-Face as well, and maybe even having Catwoman. Like, all these characters were going to be in it, and they cut like half the main characters that they were going to have in this movie.
So instead of a scene establishing a villain or a location in it and then coming back to it later in the story, it's like you get the introduction to something right before it's really intensely playing in the scene.
Well, yeah, and then like it's very fast-paced. Like you mentioned, there's times where you might look down to take a note and so much stuff has happened. Like Jack Nicholson is like machine gun firing so many of his lines, and like it is very quick pace. It's almost like a 1930s movie where it's just, you got to talk really fast.
Well, and I do love that they did lean so heavily into that noir kind of vein in terms of the dialogue, and some of the stylized shots and the lighting of everything was very noir, but that it didn't end up being so deadpan and drawn out.
Yeah, I get that. I'm surprised as a child that I was able to always watch this movie, because it's fairly long, and they're long bouts without Batman. Like Batman's only in it, what, 3 or 4 times?
There's a lot of just stuff getting blown up.
Well, and this is the thing that I thought was interesting. So coming out of the Batman that we both saw the other day, and they very much have the no-kill rule in this version, and the no-guns rule, and people even comment on it, and that's a fairly new Batman as well. And the no-kill rule with Christian Bale is a thing that we always talk about. This Batman conservatively kills 50, 60 people in this movie.
Ton of them. What's interesting to me is like when he goes into like the chemical manufacturing plant and he's like shooting everyone up, the Joker's goons didn't know that Batman was human until then, which is like so like they're willing to believe that the dude with white skin and green hair and the messed up mouth is human, but this dude covered in armor, they're not sure about.
Well, to be fair, so like the whole point of Batman is that fear and making people think he's more than human. Because like what's funny is one of my first notes is at the beginning of the movie, which is the fake origin story of Batman, and it turns out Batman rescues this family from getting mugged, but he lets the mugging happen first.
Yeah,
he's standing up on the roof watching this mugging happen, and then the bad guys come up on the roof, and then he like does this little pose with this cape out, and the muggers are like, oh my god, and they immediately shoot him. Like he is shot within 5 seconds of being on the screen, and then they're like, oh my god, and then he pops up. But to be fair, his like costume is like super muscly and everything. So
Can we talk about that costume for a second?
Let's talk about it, man.
What is going on with it? And all of the close-ups, like the head of it looks like the sculpt for it from clay wasn't like smoothed over and finished.
It moves a lot.
It's bizarre.
It moves away from his cheek and his jaws quite a bit.
It kind of looks like neoprene.
It probably is.
The suit doesn't look good.
I mean, to be fair, it's the first
suit.
one, and they did obviously change the costume for the next movie. They changed it quite a bit. But yeah, he's shot immediately.
Does the next one have nips? Or is that only Clooney?
No, Val Kilmer had nipples. I don't know why everybody gives George Clooney so much crap about it, because Val Kilmer's suit had nipples as well. I think we talked about this, actually, because we did those other movies back to back. But yeah, Batman poses a lot. Like, he gets shot, like, 3 or 4 times in this movie where he's knocked down and then, like, gets up like the last second before someone's going to rip off his mask or whatever. But yeah, they're like, people are freaked out because he keeps dropping down and he comes in the fog and everything, and he's shaped like a giant bat.
But I do like that about this, that there are so many like good poses for Batman, and that you get to see it like played up as though it's in the panel of a comic book.
They even did this like weird thing at the beginning of the movie when he's watching the people getting mugged and before he goes to take action, where it like pans out and it's just like bird's eye view, and there's this 2D animation of the cape billowing and him walking. It's weird, and it's very Tim Burton-y.
Yeah.
But he does it quite a bit, where like the same thing when he goes to Ace Chemicals, he shows up in the fog and then comes down, and Batman is like scaring Joker and the cops, and everyone's like, what the hell is that?
The chemical plant,
but
dude.
Both times he's at the chemical plant, he kills multiple people. Like, he throws a bunch of goons over the edge of the scaffolding and the catwalks, and
the goons come at him hot right at the beginning, but it's kind of like the scene plays out like all the goons were extras on set, and maybe they like watched one rehearsal and then they went for a take without a blocking rehearsal, because they're kind of like haphazard and they look confused, like they don't know where they're going, and they're kind of getting in the way of each other while they're shooting him.
They're afraid. They've never experienced anything like this, man. And also, he's incredibly strong. So the very beginning of the movie, when he's like getting those 2 people at the beginning, he picks them up like one-handed. He picks up a full-grown man. Michael Keaton picks up a full-grown man from like the collar or the ruff with his hands and holds him over an edge, arms fully extended.
Okay, but...
And he does it to the Joker multiple times.
This entire scene is completely unnecessary, because he drives through the entire chemical plant. Okay, first of all, he's like approaching that elephant door really quickly and somehow manages to shoot out like a perfect rectangle.
So this is the end of the movie now. We're jumping a little bit. When he's trying to figure out where the Joker is, they go back to the chemical plant.
Right. Yeah. So he just like barges in with that ugly Batmobile, shoots up everything, blows up a whole bunch of stuff, and then he goes around to the outside of the plant, and you're like, okay, I know that Batmobile has RPGs in it. Why didn't he just smoke the whole thing from the outside right at the beginning? And then
I think he just has machine guns.
And then later, you see the freaking plane appear. So why did he do that with the Batmobile anyway? He could have just flown over it and smoked it.
So maybe the plane...
He wanted the drama. He wanted to feel those goons in his hands.
Yeah, maybe the plane is actually in like a separate place from his car, because the car's at his house. Maybe the plane's somewhere else, and the chemical plant was on the way to his car or his plane.
It's highly unlikely.
Highly unlikely. One of the things that I'm glad you brought up the car, because it's iconic. It's one of the most iconic cars of all time. I disagree. I think it's cool. It's weird.
It looks like a Hot Wheel, but that's the only appeal.
I had that Hot Wheel. I actually really want the Lego. There's like a $600 Lego set that's like a 1/6 scale of that thing, and it's red. I'm not going to get it. I'm too lazy to put it all together.
Yeah.
But this is another thing where Tim Burton really changed not only Batman, because a lot of times when a movie like this is big, the comics change to fit the movie because they get new fans and readers and whatnot. But the Batmobile traditionally was just kind of like a souped up muscle car that had some funky gadgets in it. This changed it, and then it changed in the comic books and became like this long thing. It was what it was in the cartoon. The cartoon is loosely based off this Batman movie. And then we got all those big things, and then we had to do a weird tank with Christopher Nolan, which is still more realistic than this. And then Zack Snyder had like a combination where it was like a really long tank. And that's why I really like the new Batmobile and the Batman, because it's just like a giant Mustang or Charger or something with a turbine attached to the back.
Yeah.
So yeah, this completely changed. And also in the comic books, just saying how this changed, Batman was traditionally a black or a blue cowl with a gray suit. And at this point, yeah, it was like spandex with Kevlar or an armor plate or whatever under the chest.
It's a unitard and some boots.
Yeah. The comics changed him to being like basically a black rubber suit in the comic books too.
I had no idea that was how late that happened.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, like I had action figures and stuff from before this movie came out where they were still the old gray and blue and whatnot.
It's so interesting that happens and that they put so much reverence into this this property when they entrust it to a writer or a director, and they go through such exhaustive processes to choose these people because they want to make sure they're going to honor the material, and yet the material changes drastically with every iteration, and pop culture tends to really rally behind whatever the newest version is. So it is kind of unnecessary, the amount of reverence that they approach these with, because they're just going to completely change it in a few years anyway.
Yeah, and that's where like the Marvel movies, for example, like the Marvel movies are not necessarily comic accurate, but they're more about the spirit of the characters. Except for like Guardians of the Galaxy, because nobody knows who the hell they were, so they just let James Gunn do whatever he wanted with them.
It worked.
But it's about the spirit of the character. And there are certain things that you can say, like the Batman, for going back to the 80s, is always darker. And it was meant to be a darker character back in the 1930s, but it quickly changed because parents weren't letting their kids buy dark stuff. So the character is supposed to be dark and brooding and whatnot. So it's like there's certain things like that you need to carry forward with you with each iteration. But yeah, everybody should do their own spin.
I thought Michael Keaton was a little too like peppy and funny as Batman.
Really?
Yeah.
What exactly? I don't read that at all.
He's just got that twinkle in his eye. Like you can tell that the thought behind whatever he's talking about isn't as serious as every other Batman. There's like a gravitas that he doesn't really have for me.
That's interesting. I've never heard anybody say that. Anything like that. Like most people still think he is the best, and because one of the things that he also changed the zeitgeist with is he was the first Batman to have a different voice as Bruce Wayne and Batman. So and
then he totally throws away the line later in the film, because in the beginning of the film, "Who are you? I'm vengeance," and then later in the film he just throws away that line.
Which one? Which line?
When he says "I'm vengeance" later in the film.
Does he say "I'm vengeance" in this movie?
I thought he did, because I wrote it down here.
Oh.
Let's see. Where is it? Batman totally throws away his vengeance line, then pushes him into the bell, which makes the most disappointing bong.
Oh. So at the very end when they're in like the cathedral.
He kind of shows, he's like, hey, I'm a fun-loving guy. I'm vengeance.
So we don't necessarily have to drain this whole movie because most people have seen it, but I do want to talk about a few key things.
I want to talk about the relationships or lack of development on screen of the relationships between characters.
Yeah, there's like no chemistry between him and Kim Basinger.
No, him and Alfred, I totally believe.
Right.
And I love Michael, whatever his last name is. Goff. Are we sure?
I mean, that's what we said
Michael
on our
Goff.
Batman special for Remake Rewind. So
I buy that relationship. I feel that chemistry and that long-term thing. Maybe it's just because Kim Basinger is so boring in this.
She's boring in everything.
But it's not like they give her a lot to work with.
No, they really don't.
Her lines are boring. Her motivation, I don't really understand her motivation anywhere. When she gets led by Alfred into the Batcave, is this the first time in the movie when we see the Batcave?
No, we see the Batcave a little bit. Like that's where you see the wide shot where you can really see what's going on. But we get little glimpses of the Batcave.
First of all, there are real bats in there, and no one seems concerned about guano, which is very serious and has a lot of health implications.
You can handle it.
So Alfred walks her into the Batcave to talk to Batman, and she has the most subdued reaction ever to seeing all this for the first time. She walks in and it's like she doesn't even ask about the guano. She's just like, where have you been? Also, like and this is such a Tim Burton trope too. Unless a woman is a villain, she's pure and virginal and angelic. He puts her in that scene. She's already wearing the white coat over the white sundress. Everyone else in this movie is wearing like fall or winter wear.
But she's not from Gotham.
It doesn't matter, Michael. She's there.
She's trying to get a Pulitzer Prize by getting a photo of Batman.
Person.
She's going to buy new clothes.
So then later in the film, she's just standing there in her stupid white sun. Like, okay, I get that you wore a coat, woman, but why did you wear a white sundress to Gotham to follow Batman around?
It was before Labor Day.
It doesn't make any damn sense. And she has to go up into a bell tower. And why were they in the bell tower? I don't understand
Joker
how they
was
got
getting
there.
The helicopter from there. Because he had to run to the... Okay, so basically, we'll wrap up to the end of the movie.
Basically, Tim Burton makes women who are not evil less interesting, and they just become these pure white little props.
Oh, is that how it was in Beetlejuice with Winona Ryder?
Mm-hmm.
She was super goth in that movie. What are you talking about?
But she's transformed into this like angelic kind of thing.
So I also want to talk about the gadgets, because this is a thing that I thought was really interesting. Is they tried, like, this actually invented the grapple gun. He didn't have a grapple gun in the comic books. Like, he had like a grappling hook and he would swing, but not in a gun. And that's now become a staple of every Batman movie. Like, how are they going to do the grapple gun in this? But there was all kind of like semi-based in reality. Obviously, it's a comic book, but like, he has the grapple gun for going up and down, and he has to clip it to his belt because it's harnessed, and there's a motor in there. And then he also has this other type of grappling hook that shoots like an arrow in both directions so he can make a zip line.
What?
So it all seems like it's really well thought out as to how they could semi-practically have Batman exist. And that's something I thought was really interesting, because both the new one by Matt Reeves and the Nolan ones are always, regarded so highly because they kept it grounded, made it realistic. And I kind of think that this one kind of did it too, as realistic as it could be in the 80s.
Right, and that's why it's so jarring, because some parts are like so over the top comic booky, and then there are other things that they really do try to make realistic, and you're like, but why?
Yeah. And then it's like other things that are like when he gets in the plane, the Joker has just a little handgun that just has a really long barrel.
But he's got that lighter that's like a blowtorch.
Yeah. He's got that, and he's also got the flowers with acid, and
when he gets punched, his teeth fall out, and they're chatter teeth. What?
Well, that makes sense, because there was a point when Batman goes to rescue Kim Basinger from the museum that the Joker kind of just destroys so he can have a date with her. He says something along the lines like, "Where does he get those fantastic toys?" And then the next time we see the Joker and Batman stand off, the Joker has some more toys and gadgets and stuff like that. So I think that's kind of cool.
How did he get that together, though?
He's a gangster that is controlling like all the crime in the city.
Oof.
And he's got that money.
I just feel like this film could have been 3 films. And I kind of wish it was.
There's
so much I wanted explained and so much more I wanted to see. It's like,
what do you get
this, you get this world built for you, and you're like, wait, I want to spend some time here and have a look around, and like, you don't get to.
Yeah.
They always just show you like just barely enough to establish whatever's happening.
Yeah, they had to edit this tight.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of fluff in this. There's some iconic things. The "let's get nuts" with like Bruce Wayne. Like, that was a little weird.
This city needs an enema.
Yeah. There's some really great lines. Like, also the like, we're the true Beauty and the Beast, but if anybody else calls you Beast, I'll rip their lungs out. Like, right. There's some really good one-liners. And like with lesser actors than like Michael Keaton and Jack Nicholson, it would have just been a lot of chewing the fat and just over the top. Like, Jack Nicholson really sold the Joker. Like, a lesser actor, Jared Leto, really could. Like, there aren't too many actors that I think could have done that. I even think Robin Williams, as much as I like him, I think it would have been too goofy and silly.
Yeah.
So
he didn't even have to mail anyone anything with blood in it.
Yeah. Jared Leto.
So rude.
But Jack Nicholson killed it. And
he did.
He's still like, when I did a Joker special on Remake Rewind a couple years ago, when
he's the definitive.
He's him and Heath Ledger, like it's those two. And like, I think I actually, when we decided to pick a definitive one, I thought for sure going into that episode it was going to be Heath Ledger.
And it's so weird because it's almost like they're equal, but they're just different characters.
They're just different, very different versions. But like when you look at...
But it works because there's no like hard and fast rules about Joker's origin story, so you get that freedom. Yeah,
but like, and also with like how accurate to the comic book he was with the purple suits and the old-fashioned ties and everything. And he looks exactly like, even the hairstyle, they got his hair to look exactly the way the Joker did in the comic books.
Yeah.
In fact, they even on his helicopter, they had like a little vinyl decal, which was the Joker from the comic books. So it's
fun
and
stuff.
He looked just like him. It was really great.
I like those little Easter eggs though.
Yeah. Prince did the music. We can't.
I love that, like, you hear Prince clearly for the first time when the Joker's having his parade, and you're like, oh, this is just so relevant to what we have experienced the last few years, where like everything's falling apart, and Joker's like, well, look at me, I'm having a parade.
Yeah, and he's throwing money and cash and everybody, and people just lose their minds. So to kind of wrap it up, Joker eventually shoots down the plane. He takes Kim Basinger up to the roof of this cathedral that's the size of a skyscraper.
And he kills more people
in
that
goes
bell
up,
tower.
He throws a bunch of guys over the ledges and stuff. Like, he kills more and more people. It's insane.
There are like 20 bodies at the bottom of the bell tower.
Yeah, it's insane. The only thing I don't like about this movie, you want to hear my one thing I don't like? So there's a character who's the Joker's right-hand man. He's his number one guy, Bob. And the actual character, like, he's named Bob, but I actually had the action figure, and he's credited as Bob the Goon.
Oh.
And he kills Bob at the end.
No.
Bob was his number one guy.
That's so messed up.
Yeah, he was the guy with like the long hair and like the beret kind of thing.
You know
and
what?
The sunglasses.
What didn't get enough playtime for me?
What's that?
The bat plane. It's like they brought it out just to blow it up like 2 minutes
later. And show
later.
it over the moon to make the bat signal.
What is... And okay, does he have his license? Has he had his license?
Honey, he's a vigilante.
Does the FAA know what he's doing?
No. He's a vigilante. So. He doesn't follow. He's just killed a bunch of people. And then at the end of the movie, like before the freeze frame, like it ends in a freeze frame of him like looking down on the city. He writes a letter to Billy D. Williams, the DA, and Commissioner Gordon are there. And he's like, people of Gotham.
Dear Billy D. Williams.
Dear Lando. Crime sucks. Batman's here. I'm going to take care of you guys. If goes down, call me. And like a reporter goes like, how do we call him? And they're like this, and they just turn on the bat signal.
They had it ready to go.
They just turn it on, and it like,
shines on a cloud like the cloud is a solid
flat object. And then but I'm immediately like, why are you turning it on immediately? That's to call him. He's gonna get in his bat suit,
right?
Drive all the way over there.
It's a whole he has to like powder his entire body to put that suit on.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah, that's something I wish we got. The aftermath of the bats, because he's got to be sweating, and that mixes with the baby powder and makes like a paste.
So apparently those suits, because they're foam rubber, like they actually absorb like a bunch of sweat and get like heavier throughout the day.
Did he have to pee in it to keep warm?
So I don't know how those actually worked, to be honest with you. Like I know different versions had like zippers and stuff like that, but I know like the Christian Bale Batman, the Batman Begins suit didn't, and so he's like, yeah, you better put a zipper in here on the other one, or I'm going to get angry like I did with my mother-in-law and that guy on the set.
Okay, you know what? You never give a production the power to keep you from peeing, because that's how Boris Karloff got his kidneys messed up for life.
Yeah.
Producers do not care about your
No,
bladder.
they don't.
They don't care about your pee hole.
I'm trying to think, is there anything else in this that we really need to talk about that hasn't been said before? I feel like there's nothing we could say that hasn't been said before.
There's just, it left me wanting.
Other than you saying that there was no charisma or gravitas to Michael Keaton's Batman.
No, not that there wasn't any charisma. It's just a completely different take on the personality.
Batman.
He was so much more lively. Like, he has a soul, but at the same time, that humanism that we get from him in this film also kind of made me wonder why the relationship with Vicky Vale was so lacking.
Yeah, it was super weird because like the way they met was like she had an invitation to his party somehow, somebody who just came to the city.
And then she just like butts her way into his life.
Yeah, and yeah, it was really weird.
It's kind of demanding.
Yep.
But I mean, like, really my big takeaway from this is that this movie could have been 3 movies, and I wish it was.
Yeah, I still really enjoyed this movie.
It was fun, for sure.
I had a blast watching this. So for what it's worth, I already mentioned I watched The Batman, which is a 3-hour movie, twice.
So good.
So in a week period, I watched Batman Begins. I watched this one. I watched Batman Returns because we did Batman Returns and The Batman for Remake Rewind. So I've watched a lot of Batman stuff. And besides the new one, this was my favorite one that I watched. Like,
it's fun.
I think Batman Begins is a better movie when you look at how it's constructed and everything, but I've watched that a lot more recently, but I actually had more fun watching this than I did Batman Begins.
I think the more I watch this film, the more I'll like it, because there's so much to see.
Yeah.
It's going to take at least like 5 tries to really feel like I've seen everything in every frame.
So what we'll do when we go back to cover Batman Returns, I guess next year, we'll watch this again so that way you can be primed and get ready for Batman Returns.
Yep.
So and we've got to ask the question: childhood ruined? Or are you good?
I'm good.
You're good.
I'm good. You know, the only comment I have for Batman is like, he always ends up with like this huge trail of bodies and not a lot has been accomplished. It's like, why didn't he just invest in after school programs?
But to be fair, you're right. You're right. You're not wrong. That is a common criticism of Batman. In fact, that's even brought up in the newest version.
Oh, good.
But all the after school programs in the world weren't going to defuse those bombs or blimps with, not blimps, but parade floats filled with the laughing gas.
Maybe they shouldn't have created the
Legislate
joke in the
your
first
way
place.
out of that one.
Yikes.
Sometimes violence is needed. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not advocating violence.
Whoa. Damn.
But yeah, I mean, I had a blast watching that. I've been on a Batman kick. I actually want to go watch the other Batman again. That's how much I'm into Batman right now. Just mainline it into my veins right now. Batman. Why do you want to kill me?
Are we done?
Yeah, we're done.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. Where can our listeners find you?
I'm all over the internet at Katrinaosity.
Yeah, you is.
Although, I haven't updated any of my socials for Katrinaosity in a very long time because pandemic.
Yep.
Been busy.
And you guys can check out everything that's MDXpods related at MDXpods.com, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. You can also check us out on YouTube. Please check out our other show, Remake Rewind, hosted by me and my buddy Alex. And if you want to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/MDXpods.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks, guys.